Pakistan is going through this great boom. And the only thing that I can think of right now that can disturb this party is we might not be able to get enough talent fast enough to fuel this growth. So that's a problem I'm trying to solve with Rosie.
This is episode 8, correct, Gaurav, of the Fintech Founders series? Someone told me it was episode 8.
You're right, number 8.
Number 8. God, time flies. So today we're having Monis zoom in. Gaurav and I, as ever, are hosting this, anchoring this from Dubai. So happy hello afternoon from Dubai.
Rainy
Monis,
Dubai.
where are you zooming in from today?
I'm zooming in from our office in Lahore. So I'm inside the Dukan office in Lahore.
Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Not at all. So for the folks who are listening to this live or in replay or one of the podcasts or on YouTube or now even on TikTok, tell us a little bit about Dukan. And maybe before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, a lot of people, and we've had a few of them on our show already, a lot of people are setting up businesses, technology businesses in Pakistan today. When you began on this entrepreneurial journey, can I date you? Can I say a couple of decades ago?
Yeah, you can say that. I'll deny it, but you can say it.
You'll deny it. Yeah. You were unusual. Like, take us back in time, 20 odd years ago. What made you go into the entrepreneurial sort of route? Why not just, I don't know, join an MNC or someone's family business? Why set up your own thing?
So, I started off in the Valley, and this was in the 90s, in the mid 90s. And I started a .com around then. I was at Intel as a microprocessor engineer. The .com wave hit. All of my friends were starting .coms and Hotmail was being formed and Google and Yahoo. So all of this was happening. This new economy was being formed. So I started a startup in those days, early days in the Valley. Met a lot of amazing individuals from the Valley who were either investors or friends from that time. Long story short, in 2003, after I sold my first startup, which wasn't a great exit, I decided to move back to Pakistan because I had an idea for another startup and my family had moved back. My parents had moved back. I wanted to spend more time in Pakistan. And I noticed that the cost of engineering talent was ridiculously cheap here as compared to the US, 1/18 the cost to get a startup. So I said, well, I could be doing this startup here in the US, or I could go back home to Pakistan. I could do it from there. And it'll be a lot cheaper because my expenses are low and I can hire a bunch of people there. So I moved back to Pakistan in 2003. I started a social networking site, grew, became cash flow positive, became a cash cow, eventually iterated and launched Rosie.pk, which is our jobs platform. And that jobs platform organically grew. It was the first time that jobs had moved online from offline. Most of the jobs were advertised on newspapers. So we had this big war going on with newspapers and media. I think this is history. It happened in Pakistan too, and we were doing that. And we beat the newspapers and jobs moved online. We became fairly large for Pakistan. And then we ended up raising the first round of VC funding that ever happened in the country in around 2008. And there were no rounds of funding 2-3 years after that. So that was a very strange thing to raise VC investment for Pakistan. It was very tough to raise VC investment in those days for Pakistan. And after we raised that, we grew the business a bit more. Long story short, I did a few other things along the way. I co-founded a fintech called Finja, which is a lending platform. It's the largest in the country for MSMEs. We've given 50,000 loans to very, very small organizations. Rihanna stores. These are unsecured loans. We launched a wallet. So I've been doing online stuff in Pakistan for a long time. And when I moved back, there were only 1.8 million online users in the country, and they were mainly logging in from their offices. So our traffic would go down after office hours. On the weekend, the traffic was extremely low. Today in Pakistan, there are 110 million online users who are mainly enabled through their smartphones. So the usage has just skyrocketed. Hand phones have come into the hands of the bottom of the pyramid, as we spoke about earlier as well. So a new segment of society is now online, and they're online all the time because they have their smartphones. So it's a magical time. And you said I was early. Yes, I was early because last year, or so far this year, around 80 startups has raised about 380 million US dollars in funding just this year alone. And you compare it back to when we raised
In
money.
2021, we're in 2022 now, Monis.
2020, I'm sorry. So I need to end my calendar year. I've been doing this too long. So last year now,
Last year, yeah.
about 80 or so startups raised about $380 million. It's fairly substantial.
And that was like multiples of any year before, right? I think it was like
it was more than all previous years combined. All previous years. Because if you go back to 2008, we were the only investment back then, and that was a very small amount of money we raised.
Yeah. So last year, that 380 million US dollars was bigger than the cumulative history of VC funding, like startup funding in Pakistan, that ever since that's an amazing stat.
That's my math, yeah.
That's your math. And in 2008, when you did the first ever VC funded startup, who did you get the money from? What was the process like? Was it, institutions in Pakistan? I mean, I assume folks in the US were not interested, or am I blaspheming?
No, there wasn't really a VC market back then in Pakistan. Even now, it's very early phases. We have 4, 5, 6 funds now, and a few more funds are coming in. It's great. It's starting to grow. But there were no real local funds. I think we had 1 or 2 sort of quasi funds, but it wasn't really an option because the terms and so when I actually got an inbound query by a very large hedge fund who I'm not going to name. Everybody knows this fund, and they asked me if I was interested in investment, and I hadn't really thought about VC investment since my days in the Valley. We're growing, we're profitable. And I sort of blew it off. And then a friend of mine told me that this is a pretty substantial organization fund. It's not a scam email you're getting. So I engaged, and then I started to think, well, if I was able to raise funding, I could grow faster.
Yeah.
So eventually I hopped on a plane and I flew to the US, and I went to Sand Hill Road, the area that I knew earlier in my life. And I went up and down, and I spoke about the Rosie story. Our job story was doing well. All the numbers were going up. But the Pakistan story was actually where I spent most of the time trying to sell. There was a massive image issue. There's a perception issue, or people just had no idea where we were. Yeah. And in either case, either it was a dangerous place, or I don't know where this is, and it was too far to invest. So I really had to sell the Pakistan story. That's what my first initial. So I got some bites, and I ended up closing a round of funding from 2 VC investors from the Valley.
Oh wow!
So that's how we raised it. But it was the first VC investment ever. And it was even how we structured it. That was a model that a lot of other startups now are using. We actually incorporated in the US, and we found a way to have that whole a Pakistan entity with the VC agreements in the US. So I had to sort of find a way to do this, and now it's happening a lot, which is great to see.
Wow. That's awesome. Now, before we move on, and I want to bring Gaurav into the conversation, and just a reminder to the audience, you should register for the Fintech Founders series, add it to your calendar, the links on the chat. If you're listening to this on the podcast, look out for the links in the podcast so you sign up. This is available on multiple channels now, so register and sign up. Gaurav, come on into the conversation.
Hey, brother. Lost me there for a second. Had to switch from one device to another, ninja style a bit, but I'm back. So here we go. Hey, so
we just discussed the history of Pakistan. Basically, Monis is the history of Pakistan funding, and
it seems like it. I think we could do, just another session on uncovering him sort of being the tip of the spear, trying to set up funding and making businesses more fundable in Pakistan. But perhaps for another episode, Monis. But really looking at your journey as a founder right now, I think it's very easy for people to say that they're funding companies in Pakistan now. It seems to be the hot topic. But where you're sitting right now, you've got a lot of titles. I can see 3 different companies. I can see 3 different things. So there's a lot of experience that's come with that, right? And no easy task. But one thing that I really want to understand is the journey of talent as well. I mean, Pakistan and India are famous for having engineering talent, and but the thinking of building companies that are generally not profitable or scaling at certain sizes, exporting technology from the country in that style. I mean, how has that been as an evolution of Pakistan? How have you seen that happening so far in your personal journey? Are you going to take much of what you've got out of Pakistan as well?
Great question there. 3 or 4 questions embedded in there. I think first, just to speak about the business model, the online model, you're right. When we came in 2003 and then we launched our jobs platform, we were nobody. It was not known by anybody. The newspapers were where you went to advertise jobs. They're very large. They have a brick and mortar presence everywhere. You buy their paper. They've got huge brands. And in order to grow, we were a free platform. So for 3 years, we're completely free. And it was insane.
That's
and
insane.
Everybody told me I was crazy. It's like, well, there's no income. This makes no sense here, And the newspapers certainly wouldn't lose any money from a unit economics, So I was actually viewed as being this insane guy doing things that will not work. And people told me you'll be on a plane home to Pakistan soon. And that may have happened, but I guess there's a very thin line between success and failure. So we waited long enough to see that hockey stick, rise. And so we became the largest jobs platform in the country. But this business model, this patience of waiting 3, 5, 6 years was very alien to us in Pakistan, because the people who had cash here, money, would invest in projects, and those projects would have ROI in the first year or year 2. And when you talk about an online model, it's not tangible. How do I value this? It's basically the furniture in my office are the assets of the company. So it was a mindset that I think, had to be a little bold and outrageous to be able to last through it. And, a lot of people threw stones at you.
Right. And, it's incredible when you look at it, right? Because even in this region, in the Middle East and Africa, again, businesses were run for profit. The startup model, the venture capital model is something that's still finding its feet, and credit to the people who have already seen exits in that short time. That's going to be the hardest thing, right? I mean, you lay the foundation for a conversation, and this is the conversation I have with other people in the Pakistan ecosystem or other ecosystems that are really up and coming and have the spotlight of them. Money's coming in, talent is, there's a brain drain reversal that's happening. Things we've seen in other ecosystems, and people are trying to understand. Yeah, exits now.
To address that question, it's a great insight you had. And you asked about the talent and the evolution of that over time. And so I'll tell you, when I came to Pakistan, I started in a small room of my house. I did the coding. I was a coder. I was an engineer. I was a techie. And I hired 3 other people. And they'd done some programming, but never at a large scale. So the software engineers you'd hire could sort of do stuff, but they never built scalable platforms. They'd never seen that before. So that was the first journey, is helping people, migrate and dealing with an outage of a server because you didn't architect it correctly and the coding was wrong. So that whole evolution, which I saw in my early days in the Valley as well, we're trying to scale, but we learned that. So now you've got a talent pool that is now starting to move up. They're getting a bit smarter because now they're starting to get some international projects, international exposure, but they were still fairly cheap. And in fact, it was about, I think, a third or fourth the cost of a developer in India for the same skill set.
Wow.
And the salaries were very inefficient because there weren't any online job boards. So you would hire somebody who's being paid 50,000 rupees and another person being paid 20,000 rupees, even though the guy at 20,000 was of a higher skill set, right? Because it wasn't efficient. Now we have online jobs, it's a lot more efficient. But today, we're in a situation where you have $380 million come into an economy that's already moving online in terms of the FMCGs and the banking sector and everybody's moving online. So demand for IT talent has skyrocketed in a ridiculous way. So salaries over the last year have increased by 100 to 200%. And older software houses are having trouble reconciling this and saying, oh, that's outrageous. But sitting where I'm sitting, I'm like, if you don't pay these guys, I know 50 other employers who will hire them for more. So all of a sudden, we've got a shortage of talent. And we saw this in the US. I was in the US when this happened, the dot-com boom. I was there and I saw how it was very hard to find engineers and the salaries just skyrocketed and there was a lot of job hopping going on.
Right.
Exactly the same is happening now here in Pakistan. So we've got a talent shortage. IT skills are in demand. They're rising. A lot of people are doing training. On my jobs platform, we started a boot camp where we're now creating full stack programmers in a matter of 3 months. And because we have excess kind of demand from our clients for those skill sets. So Pakistan is going through this great boom. And the only thing that I can think of right now that can disturb this party is we might not be able to get enough talent fast enough to fuel this growth. So that's a problem I'm trying to solve with Rosie.
So one last question I have to ask you before I hand over back to the man that is Ronit is, I'm a second generation builder, right? I'm a second generation entrepreneur. I was very fortunate to grow up in that environment and then learn things as well, right? Whereas you had to create things also in a very nascent kind of way. So kudos to you. But what I also see in that journey, the same as you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is where you were creating your own unfair advantages, you were creating in a space that was unexplored. And therefore you created those advantages before everyone else. And the market had to get educated and experienced to catch up with you in building a company, scaling company, raising money, and finding which opportunities to get those unfair advantages on. But the playing field seems level now. It seems like capital is easy, company setup is easy, showcasing how you do things, right? And with what you're doing right now with Dukan, right? How much tougher has it become in terms of competition? Being very honest, being very candid, is it really like, my God, we have to do so much more to innovate, and it's really tough on my margins? Or is it because you've been doing it so long, you're sort of like upping the ESOP and the equity and the talent pool to try and keep them more sticky and in-house? Because everyone leaves after 3 years. I don't know who stays in jobs. I mean, I've been in the same job for 20 years. That's an exception. I think Ronit's been there for 50 years in his job, but we don't talk about it.
Talk about that, Gaurav.
We don't talk about this on podcast. but generally speaking, tell me about that aspect of the game, which has now become level playing field. What does that do for you in competition?
What a great question again. So yes, we've seen massive influx of investors, new startups, great people flying in back home to Pakistan, which is great, because now they can do exciting stuff and they can raise funding and they can, make a decent income while they do it. So you've got a lot of smart people flying back, a lot of smart people who were at, great organizations, leaving those organizations and doing their own thing. A lot like the early days in the Valley. It was the same thing. I was at Intel and I left my job and, I started a startup. So that's happening here. A lot of people are going to succeed and a lot more are going to fail. And a lot of this investment that's coming in is basically educating the whole ecosystem, in terms of the entrepreneurs and the investors and the ecosystem and the partners and the large players, banks. So a lot of progress is happening through this, but they're going to be failures. And we need to be very open to accepting that they will be those as well. That being said, because this is fairly nascent and you've got some well-funded startups in the last year or two, it's quite recent, the market is so big. So there's a $500 billion of GMV that moves in between the supply chains, right? If you go from one to the other, it's a massive amount of money that's moving. So now, yes, players are starting to eat up at that, but the market is still wide open. There's, it's not like there's any player that has 80% of the market and can't be beat. Even in terms of the largest player for online sales is e-commerce, Draz. They're doing really well. They're big, but they're not that big yet, right? That you can't beat them. So there's a lot of opportunity yet. So how is it now for me as an entrepreneur with a venture that I launched about 9 months ago, Dukan? It's been incredibly exciting. It's been exciting. Why? Because it's never been this easy to raise funding. We raised funding prior to even forming the company, and getting a lot of inbound queries. I used to have to chase investors with a deck over 6-8 months. Investors see the opportunity, they understand the opportunity, it's very real. So it's a lot easier to attract investment because it's a new market, it's growing very quickly, it's large. So that problem's been there. The other problem for me has been, you learn the ecosystem. If you want to implement a wallet inside your app or do your payments and you want to do acquisition and partnerships and build and teams. And so I've done all that before, right? So I've built Rosie, I've built Finja platform, payment ecosystem. So we've got a lot of IP and know-how. So building what we've built in the last 9-10 months, it's almost unimaginable to be able to do that quickly because you have all the partnerships, integrations, ecosystems, so can do things faster in terms of lay of the land and marketing. So I feel that it's been much easier and much more fun this time around because the rails are laid and have done a lot of these things earlier. Now that being said, what's going to happen is exactly what you're saying, is now as we start executing faster, we have about 330 shops on our platform that's growing quickly, but you've got a lot of other players going after this SME, MSME end of the market. And, in a matter of 2-3 years, especially at the pace of investment that's entering the country, then you start to cross swords. We haven't really crossed swords yet. We have in our minds, oh, that person's doing this, why did I do this? But in reality, the market is so large and such a small percent of it has moved to these new online ecosystems that we're not in a position yet where we're really crossing swords, except for a few spaces maybe.
Super interesting. Thanks, Monis. I think, Ronit, I want to hand back to you because I think that was super insightful and you've got some other burning questions you want to pull out of Monis before the session times out.
So Monis, you've talked about, how building this time around with Dukan was different to Finja and Rosie and others you've been involved in. If you step back, what are the kind of common threads in all these businesses you've built or been part of building, or, they seem in very different areas, right? One is jobs, one is kind of fintech related, one is, MSMEs and e-commerce. What are the underlying threads or commonalities? Is it simply at different points of time you've been interested in different ideas, business ideas and problems to solve? Or is it, walk us through are there sort of common triggers and sort of common learnings between all these different businesses?
Yeah, so these dots have all been interlinked and connected. They all connect. And one idea comes out of another idea. It wasn't that one day I said, I'm bored, I need to think of a new idea. Unfortunately didn't happen. It's sort of like you get pregnant with an idea. I'm like, oh my God, there's an idea brewing. I gotta let this out. So
how did that happen? How did I get?
That's the only way I can explain it. I'm doing all of these things. So are you okay there, Gaurav?
It's okay. This is still PG, Gaurav.
I'm just crying. There's just tears coming out of my eyes right now.
Yes.
I don't know if I was allowed to say that. I apologize.
No, you just said pregnant, right? We didn't talk about anything else. Like.
Get back to it, guys. Get back to it.
Yeah.
So I was saying, the common thread is this. With Rosie, we realized how many lives we can actually change.
Yeah.
We have gotten over 1 million people into jobs, and that changes their household, livelihoods, education of the children. It's beautiful to see. And then during COVID, we launched a blue-collar jobs platform, and that's growing super fast. So now we've got the top of the pyramid, educated people, and the super uneducated people who now have smartphones. Now we've got jobs for them, and we've got their information, their data, and we're seeing this uplift happen. And then this is all interconnected with financial well-being of these people, right? That's why you find jobs. And then with Finja, with all of the payment rails and able to now allow these people to get funds, to get loans, and to exchange money. And another big piece of this economy that hasn't moved online, but it's inevitably going to, we've got the professionals, the job seekers, blue collars, where the ability to take data and understand data and be able to offer them financial services. And one of the key missing ingredients there was these MSMEs, these small shops outside. They can't get credit. They can't get financially included. They're being extremely inefficient. They're paying more money to do things that should be a lot easier and faster. And we know how to build things. With Dukan, that's what we do. So now we give them a commerce platform that connects their suppliers, the distributors. We've got the supply chain. We've got the wallet. You're doing online sales. I've got your inventory. I've got your accounting. I've got your ad. So all of this stuff now, there's tremendous data that now we're beginning to really make sense of this. And now we can give credit to these people. We can give them financial service. So the ability of actually uplifting this economy from the base, the foundation, is the thread that ties all of this. You know, you create income opportunities and you give the financial services to a sector of society that was largely excluded. And that's what's happening now. It's incredibly exciting.
And this time around, building Dukan, he's talked about how much easier it was to raise funding. I'm sure part of that is simply, you know, you're a repeat founder with so many businesses that VCs are doing pattern recognition. They don't need to see your next business plan. They've seen you. But then there's also this flood of liquidity that you talked about that's come in, and it's a global phenomenon, right? Over the last few years, VC funding last year in general, particularly, you know, fintech, e-commerce, you know, we've broken all kinds of records globally, and also in this part of the world, call it Middle East, South Asia, further afield in Africa. I mean, all kinds of records have been broken in this part of the world. There's money coming in. What if I was being devil's advocate and I said, Monis, there's no real Pakistan story here. Just hear me out. There's no real Pakistan story. This is just huge amount of money. You know, there's a tech boom in the US for a decade. People know they make money in, you know, tech. Then we had COVID. We had all this monetary policy action. The liquidity had to eventually go, you know, a few drops spilled over from the bucket, ended up in Nigeria, Egypt, Pakistan, and now the world's going back into a pre-COVID, you know, interest rates are going up in the US. Many tech stocks are down 50, 70%. Was last year just a flash in the pan, Monis, of Pakistan? Was it just like you guys
are you trying to pick a fight, Ronit? Here, are you trying to light gas? I mean,
great question.
You know, look, we're all like, I mean, God, I mean, if it wasn't COVID, I mean, you and I would be on the flight to Karachi and Lahore, right? You know, Gaurav. So let's try to be a little bit half glass empty rather than half glass full.
No, it's
it.
a beautiful question. It's actually
like
a really, really good question that you know, needs some introspection. And I've thought a lot about this question. Yeah. Was it just a stroke of luck?
Fundamentals versus flows. Financial flows versus fundamentals. Discuss.
So let's speak about that. So, you know, certainly there's liquidity and people are trying to find out where to put their money.
Yeah.
And COVID happened and, you know, one or two guys opened their eyes and they saw a country, 220 million people, fifth most populous country in the world, 110 million smartphone-enabled internet users, 50 million of them came on board in the last 5 years from the bottom of the pyramid. The fastest growing segment of accounts are now the wallets. About 70% of accounts came from people opening phones on their wallets. So there's a financial inclusion is growing. And you know what? The unofficial economy, according to our state bank, is at least the same size as the official economy, right? This is offline economy.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing that online usage is skyrocketing. Growth of e-commerce last year or the year before that now, sorry, was 84% among the fastest in the world. So people are now starting to shop online. Everybody has a smartphone. Everybody's exchanging emails and WhatsApps and, you know, so we're seeing this entire population, especially after COVID, is getting active online. And you've got a massive piece of the economy that's online. And now the question is, can these people actually use technology to do these offline problems? That's really the question here. And now we're starting to validate that because these 15 million people who are now coming online are starting to trade on WhatsApp, Instagram. So these incremental solutions built by local entrepreneurs that plug in those last mile interconnects are now taking these ways of people, understanding where they came from, and helping them nudge along into the new economy. That's what we're doing with our Rozgar platform. We've seen 60,000 blue-collar workers who are uneducated on a smartphone, upload a video, and find online jobs. So that question of whether this massive economy can adopt these new tools, which they have, and take their trading and the commerce to this new economy, the hints or the data points we have right now are all saying very strongly yes. And if that's the case, this is the best country in the world to invest in because there's so much opportunity left. And $330 million of funding in 1 year, if you compare it globally, is actually a very tiny, tiny amount.
Oh, it's
so
like one funding round, like in the US. Before I hand it back to Gaurav to wrap up.
It's still underfunded, and I'm predicting that next year the amount will be at least twice as large. So there's some good stuff going on. I think what happened is people were reluctant to invest in the economy in Pakistan. And because of COVID, and we saw some traction there, the snowball just started. And now there's a behavioral change where investment funds are now open to investing in Pakistan, where 10 years ago they weren't. That's what's changed. The opportunity, has just escalated very quickly. And every startup that raises investment is now helping us move across this curve because they're creating new railroads, they're spending field staff, so the economy is starting to come online on the back of this historic investment. So it just gets better.
And I guess when you were raising before, particularly in 08 or even later, it'd be mainly sell me the Pakistan story, then your business. And maybe that's beginning to flip around now that there's been a de-risking.
It's totally, we have funds that contact us because they want to invest in Pakistan. Say, I want to invest in Pakistan. What's out there?
And then tell me the business. Whereas the other way before it was like, oh, you're in Pakistan. Now it's like.
The pattern matching now that you were talking about earlier is happening. But investors aren't pattern matching founders as much as they're pattern matching business models.
Yes. I want an API business in Pakistan next or something. Yeah.
Everyone wants APIs.
Oh my God. Yes. Well, before I give Gaurav the stage to wrap up, one final question though. I want to throw out to Monis. So the fundamentals are changing. You talked about the online economy, this is the global trend, but it's particularly powerful in the global South and in the sort of South Asia, Middle East, Africa region. If you were 21, I'm not saying you're not, but if you were 21 rather than middle-aged like me and you are, what would you be doing today? Would you be building a business in Pakistan? And if so, what kind of business or what kind of activity would you get involved in? Or would you still get on a plane, head to the valley or wherever else? What would you be doing today?
I don't know how sincere I'll sound when I say this, but if I was 21, I would love to be doing exactly what I'm doing now. I'm sorry, because this is the time. It's wide open landscape. There's funding available, infinite opportunities, problems to solve. So much value is being created. I was in the Valley when this happened in the US. And I saw how much value was created by the people who were fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. Well, I'm in the right place at the right time here,
But would you be building the same type of business? Surely, I don't know, you'd be doing something on TikTok or crypto or I don't know.
I probably wouldn't.
Maybe you are. Maybe I'm not following you closely enough.
I don't think I would have the maturity at 21 to be able to understand this whole offline economy. And it's kind of this old school economy. I might be wanting to do something more exciting, like a crazy social networking site, which I did earlier in my career.
But basically, you're living your life. You're saying you're living the life you'd want to live if you were 21 again.
I think so. I'm very grateful to be where I am right now. I just love I'm having such a good time. I wouldn't be anywhere.
Gaurav, back to you. Are you living your life like 21, Gaurav?
Look at me. I'm the king of the world.
Ain't looking like a 21-year-old to me, mate.
That's the beard. Don't let it fool you. I look 18 if I shave it. But from my part, listening to this conversation, Monis, thanks a lot for sharing what is definitely a historical and a current context and coloring of the landscape it is for founders, especially fintech founders now. But two things for me in wrapping this up and signing this off before we hand it back to our gracious partners at CFTE. One comment is, I wonder, it's so interesting looking at it from a 30,000 feet perspective and a little bit political. The money that was flowing into Pakistan before geographically and the money flowing into Pakistan now geographically is very interesting. I'll just leave that there. Let's just say East and West and leave it at that.
Very interesting.
I'll just leave that there. I'll just leave that there, right? I don't want to, maybe we'll stir the pot later. But, and that, one comment, fine. But one prediction, I wonder if we'll see in Dukan's future, dark stores as a concept as part of your business line. I think, there we go. You heard it here first, folks. Prediction number one. It's out of the can. Monis, you're a horrible poker player. So listen, excellent, excellent. So one prediction, one comment, and I'm done on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monis, for joining us from Lahore today.
Thank you, Monis.
Putting up with Gaurav and myself.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you guys. I really enjoyed it.